Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session of Illini Aero Connections. Today we're going to be speaking with Gary Weber. Gary is a 2012 graduate of aerospace engineering. He went on to get a master's from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and graduated from there with honors. Gary has gone on to have several different positions. One of those, which is most relevant to our topic today, though, was working at LinkedIn in a business-to-business account manager position, I believe. So Gary has a great program for us today. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to him.
Hey everyone, it's thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. It's great to be back in contact with the program. It's certainly been a few years since I've been engaged with the Aero program, so welcome that opportunity. My wife and I actually drove down to Champaign in the July timeframe. We hadn't been back for years, and everything was shut down, obviously, given sort of the state of the world. But it was still great to drive around campus and sort of walk down memory lane. So once Samantha reached out to get this program started, I thought, how fortuitous. I'm trying to get back in touch with the school, and now I have an opportunity to do so. Let me pop open this presentation here just to use this as sort of a guidepost. Can everyone see my presentation? Probably not. Hold on. How about now? I'll take it. Thanks, Robert. Okay, great. So whenever I've sat in these types of presentations, I prefer when folks take a moment to just provide the voiceover in their background, because I think knowing a little bit about me personally and professionally will help put a lot of what I have to say in context. And you have to take everything someone says with a grain of salt and understand their perspective. So a lot of my perspectives will be obviously informed by my personal background and my professional background. So let's start there. So I started at the University of Illinois in 2007 as an aerospace undergraduate. And I was there for 5 years. I took a year off. I shouldn't say took a year off, but I studied abroad for a year in Madrid. And so it ended up putting me on a 5-year program, which I do not regret in the slightest. While I was an undergrad, I interned at NASA Ames Research Center. And then I also interned at the Boeing company up in Kent. I was in the Kent, Washington facility. When I left U of I had sort of realized that being an engineer, as much as I loved the subject matter, just wasn't the right fit for me professionally. And so I decided to make a transition to consulting, management consulting firms. It's not an impossible transition for someone from engineering to get into management consulting. So I started my career at Bain & Company in Chicago, worked across a variety of different industries for the 2-year analyst program there. And then after 2014, my wife and I decided to move to San Francisco. And I was telling Courtney before this that I wanted to get more into sort of the business management and business operations side of things, basically, own a P&L, make decisions that, could drive top line revenue, but also manage costs of a business, essentially drive profitability of a particular business unit. And that's exactly the opportunity that was afforded to me at LinkedIn. And so I'm by no means a social media influencer or a social media expert, but I know a decent amount about LinkedIn and the product and the platform based on my 2 years there, having essentially helped manage the sales organization that went and sold this product to large enterprises. In 2016, I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get my MBA, which Courtney mentioned. So I was in Philadelphia for 2 years. And then starting in 2018, I sort of made what I hope will be the last major shift in my career, at least for a while, to growth equity investing. And so I worked in London for a bit, and now I live in San Francisco full time. But today my job is to make growth equity investments in technology, financial services, and payments companies. I'm at a firm called FTD Capital here in San Francisco. I'm originally from the Chicago area, though. I grew up in Crystal Lake, Illinois. If you're familiar with it, it's a northwest suburb of Chicago. When I was at U of I was an Aero undergrad degree, as I mentioned, but I was also involved in a student consulting organization called OTCR. I was also in the undergraduate, the minor program, technology and management. And then as I mentioned, I studied abroad in Spain. met my wife at U of I, so we certainly have, like I said, a strong affiliation with the school. And in my free time, I really like boxing, hiking, and that sort of outdoors generally. My wife and I try to get up to Napa Valley up here in the San Francisco area pretty regularly, and I still follow Chicago sports pretty closely. So moving to the heart of the presentation today, I want to start by just sharing what I think the objectives for today should be. And I think first and foremost, my objective was to provide tactical tips and tricks to help students coming out of the Aero program to advance their careers by making most of social media, but more specifically LinkedIn, in a way that is authentic to your style and approach. And I'll talk more about this later, but I've developed my own style, and I've witnessed the styles of other folks, and I wouldn't say that one is necessarily superior to the other. I think the important message there is engaging on this platform in a way that makes sense for you and makes sense for your career objectives. My second objective for today was to offer, my personal thoughts and perspectives on your various questions and Q&A topics that may come up at the end of the presentation. And then lastly, to make myself available to you folks on a sort of follow-up conversation as and when it makes sense. I've shared my personal email address with you on the presentation, and so feel free to reach out to me after the fact if I can be helpful to you. So let's move into the heart of today. So let's just start with basic facts on the scale and scope of LinkedIn. There's a bunch of data points here. I've tried to highlight the most instructive ones. And for me, and these aren't exact numbers, but they're relative, they're approximately correct. There are several 100 million unique profiles on LinkedIn on a global basis. And it is the single largest global professional network. A couple of years back, there were regional players, so think like a German only or a French only or some Asia Pacific only professional platforms, but in terms of global coverage, LinkedIn stands alone in terms of the largest global platform. And then in particular, if you think about penetration in the United States, there are about 160, probably close to 200 million profiles now at this point in time in the United States. And that's a very substantial portion of the sort of adult population in the United States, both professional workers, those with higher education, as well as folks in, call it blue collar jobs and other sort of professional trade jobs. So it's a pretty broad cross section of frankly, the knowledge economy in the United States. On the right-hand side, the other point I'll mention is that there's pretty substantial penetration into U.S. college graduates, but not 100% penetration, which I think is pretty surprising. And then the other point I'll mention is that these estimates are that there are about 90 million or so LinkedIn users that are decision makers, senior individuals within their organizations. And so my point with this slide is basically to say this is a really relevant platform where there are a lot of pretty senior individuals, both senior executives of large corporations, but also decision makers throughout the entire sort of enterprise, and as well as smaller organizations as well. And so engaging on this platform provides you a unique opportunity to find those individuals, be seen by those individuals, or reach out to those individuals directly to drive some sort of outcome, whether it be an introduction, a sales opportunity, a hiring opportunity, et cetera. And so, it is just a vibrant, relevant network for one's professional life. So this, I mentioned I wanted to make this tactical, and to me, from the perspective of students and to some extent early in career professionals, I think there are two main ways to use LinkedIn to further your career. And I think the simplest way to put it is, one, to manage your professional brand, and the second is to get a job. There are other use cases, and I can talk about those as well if folks are interested in hearing about them. But I think these are probably the two main ones. And so in the first one around building and managing your professional brand, I just wanted to talk through some of the basics of the LinkedIn profile and what you can do and how you can showcase yourself to basically craft the story around your background. And those main sections are your professional, your education, your professional image, your professional experiences, other sort of volunteer experiences and other skills that you want to highlight. And the one thing I'll say is, I'm at a point in my career now where I've hired a number of people, both at LinkedIn and in my current job, and I always look at someone's LinkedIn profile in tandem to their resume, as well as any other content I might receive. And for better or for worse, I think for better, it's helpful to see how folks portray themselves online, who they might be connected to, what sort of affiliations I might have, and with that individual. And a resume certainly is helpful in conveying that information, but there's something about the way in which LinkedIn surfaces potential connections or points of commonality to a candidate that I find really helpful. And the data that LinkedIn pulled together, the snippets of this PowerPoint presentation are from a presentation that LinkedIn prepared for university students. According to their data, a significant portion of hiring managers do look at the profiles of candidates they're evaluating. So it's important to, at least at a minimum, manage how what information you are sharing to those potential decision makers. So jumping right into education, this is the mobile version of LinkedIn. LinkedIn's becoming increasingly a mobile proposition, though desktop is certainly an important part. But I don't think the format necessarily matters. I think what's important to point out is that you either have graduated or you're about to graduate from an incredible institution, and you should be proud to put that in your profile. Folks, especially in the aerospace community, being from the aerospace engineering department at U of I is incredible accolade to have on your resume, and so you should have that on your LinkedIn profile as well. It should be clear, what school you went to, what your degree was, and also relevant clubs and any honors. I wouldn't. This is a point around authenticity and sort of how you want to engage. If you go to my profile, I have a few clubs and awards listed, but I don't go overboard. I think there's an important synthesis that has to happen where you highlight the most important data points about your background, as opposed to inundating the world with a long list of accolades. I think it's just more powerful if you focus on the 1 or 2 points that really make you distinct, as opposed to having a much longer list. That said, there are folks that have longer lists of accolades, and that approach may be fine as well. I think the more important point is you should certainly have some version of your academic background available for folks online, so they can know how hard you work to get a really prestigious degree from the aerospace department. The second thing is a profile photo. And I know this seems really obvious, but you would be surprised the number of folks that have really, frankly, unprofessional photos in their LinkedIn profile. And this is essentially someone's professional headshot, and you can tell that. I don't think even that's necessary, but having a friend take a decent photo of you, shoulders up, where you sort of more or less put together how you would look at a normal workday, is really important. I've seen too many people with a photo of them and another person, and they clearly cropped out the person that they took the photo with. And, it's not a disqualifying factor for sure, but you don't want to give folks a reason to pass over your profile, and having an unprofessional photo, certainly gives them that opportunity. And also, when you think about differentiating yourself and getting the attention of decision makers, the data from LinkedIn would suggest that folks with a profile photo get more views. And so if folks are looking at your profile, you want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in a professional image. The third one gets to experience, professional experience. And frankly, it's a toss-up for me between academics and experience, professional experience, which are the most important. I think coming out of undergrad, I think this balance changes over time. When you're coming out of undergrad, your education probably matters more, but as you build a career, your professional experience is going to provide more texture to your story, and probably weighs more importantly. But regardless, you should have an accurate version of your career presented to folks. when you're first starting out, you can list internships, you can list summer jobs. I personally, I think I still list some of my internships from undergrad on my profile, not because they're professionally relevant. I'm not getting jobs today because of, the 3 months I worked in Mountain View at NASA Ames Research Center, but it is certainly a conversation starter when folks ask, well, how did you worked at NASA? How did you transition from being an aerospace engineer to being a growth equity investor? And so this kind of gets to my point around how you have to choose how you want to portray yourself and the information that you share, and what is the authentic version of yourself. So I don't put a lot of detail in my internship because I was there for a few months, and it would be disingenuous for me to represent anything more than an internship. But it is what it is, which is an interesting experience that adds texture to my background, and it's something I'm proud of. And so I have it on my profile, so I can have a conversation with folks that find that interesting. You too should think about your rich set of experiences professionally, whether as a student or after school, and think about how should I portray those experiences to best show the authentic, accurate version of myself that is going to kind of tell people what I'm about, both professionally and primarily professionally. Some folks argue that you should sort of describe what you've accomplished in that role. That's I think that depends on your personal style. For example, in some of my roles, I've listed some of the successful growth equity investments that I've made. I know some people who are in sales roles will list, the revenue that they generated or the quota that they've attained. I've seen some folks in engineering capacities list the patents that they've successfully filed, et cetera. So I think you kind of have to define what that is for you. But again, if there are high-level accomplishments that you can put into the description that bring your experiences to life, I think it's helpful. But again, my personal approach is I wouldn't inundate people with too much information. I would keep it high level, main points, the things that really differentiate you. If you're applying for a job, you'll have the opportunity to share your resume, which has a more fulsome list of experiences and accomplishments in those roles. But my personal opinion is that that's probably less appropriate for like a public audience where you don't necessarily know who's looking at that information. But to each their own. I'm sure there are folks that have done it a different way and had success. I think the broader point is you should have a version of your professional experience available. The last thing, one of the last points I'll say around experiences is, there are, volunteer experience is an important part of some people's personal and professional interests. And you should feel free to put those on your profile, the extent to which you want to broadcast them and the extent to which they add character to your profile. LinkedIn has some data to suggest that volunteer experience can be weighted as part of like professional experience. I think that totally depends on the amount of professional experience you have, the type of work you were doing as a volunteer working at some sort of nonprofit. But point being, you should have that evaluation. So you should ask yourself, well, is what I'm doing additive to my profile by, sharing a passion of mine or sharing a conviction I have or demonstrating to folks that I care about XYZ cause? Or does it add, skills and experiences that might actually help you in a professional context? That's sort of a case-by-case assessment. And there's no sort of broad rule for that. But I do think it's a question worth asking yourself as you think about building your profile. Does my volunteer experience add meaningfully to my background? And if yes, consider adding a version of it to your profile. And the last thing I'll say is skills. And this is one that I struggle with this one, if I'm being honest with you. I know LinkedIn has been pushing skills on their profile quite a bit, but as someone who, again, has done some hiring in my day, I personally don't pay too much attention to the skills portion of the profile. But because I think a lot of times you end up with these very generic terms. So for example, I work in finance today, and this example here on this slide is financial analysis. That means so many different things in so many different contexts. And so that's not helpful to me to understand whether a candidate may or may not have the skills required to do the job that I'm hiring them for. So a description of the work they did in their professional experiences or their undergraduate curriculum is going to be much more relevant to me than these skills. Now, all that said, I do think if you have a really unique skill that is like discrete and quantifiable or measurable in some way, the examples in the slide are, do you speak a foreign language, or do you know a specific programming language? Absolutely, those skills should be brought front and center because they're going to help. For example, in the technical world, there are recruiters that look for software engineers with experience with specific programming languages. And so if Ruby on Rails, for example, is a hot topic. And so some software engineers will put that as a skill on their profile so that recruiters who are looking for that particular skill set know that particular software engineer has that skill set. I presume it's still the case. I guess I can't presume, but back when I was in undergrad, a lot of us spent a lot of time in MATLAB, and that's a discrete, measurable skill and is relevant in the professional context. So that might be an example of something you'd want to highlight. So I think skills can be useful. Be wary of over-investing time here, because I do think that they can be a little bit generic and watered down in a way that's less helpful. But again, it's sort of a case-by-case basis, and just, again, think through what makes me unique and differentiated from in terms of my skills and background, to make sure that those skills are brought to light. Okay, so that was all. How do you manage your profile? How do you manage the external version of your professional and various experiences so that you can manage your professional image when someone lands on your profile page? I think the second big use case for LinkedIn is, how do you get a job after school? And I know last week, I think Jenny Roderick and one other individual spoke about entrepreneurship, and I think I'm so glad you guys talked about that. And I wish I had joined that session to hear what they had to say. If you choose to go down entrepreneurship, that's certainly one route. But let's say, a good chunk of folks are going to choose to go work for another company as opposed to try to start their own company. And so, there's a whole separate process to go find a job that interests you. And so the next set of slides are sort of to help highlight some of the tools and data and resources that are available on LinkedIn to help, to basically help inform that process for you. The presentation that this came from tried to orient, to universities, to college students, and say, hey, well, you've got so many other things that you're focused on around academics, clubs, extracurriculars, the day-to-day life of living on campus. And then there's a whole set of other things that you have to start thinking about the closer and closer you get to graduation, around what sort of career would you want to pursue after school? What companies might you apply to? How would you go about doing that? And so the focus of these slides is sort of the bottom half here of, how do you think about a career? How do you go find those jobs, et cetera? So the first place I'll start is, there are tons of different ways to explore where you might want to start your career. And the university has got professional they've got professional resources to help you think through career options. And so this is the option, the data, the sort of information I'm showing here is one tool of probably many different services that are available to you to help answer this question. But what LinkedIn has done is they've basically organized data on career trajectories, geographies, et cetera, of where particular alumni have gone from particular universities. And the benefit of the University of Illinois becoming, such a large institution is that the more data they have about the university, the more valuable those insights are. And so there's a career insights portal that's available through the university page, which allows alumni to find different ways to sort through the alumni base and essentially explore what have people that came before me done with their careers, with my degree or other degrees of this university. What geographies have they gone to? What companies have they gone to work for? And depending on the type of company or the type of role, there's quite a bit of granularity on exploring how folks have taken their degree and made careers out of those degrees. And so I flag this, because if you're trying to figure out what folks have done, this is a great tool to think through different career options, in addition to, again, all the other resources that the university provides. The second thing I'll say is referrals are still an incredibly important part of how a lot of folks find a job and get hired. And LinkedIn is democratizing this in a bit because it provides you a way to get a referral directly, to basically facilitate your own referral for a particular job, because you've got this massive network at your disposal that you can access through, the alumni network, et cetera, or, common connections, to essentially reach out to folks directly and ask for those referrals. So for, one of the examples that LinkedIn likes to give, and I think is actually really instructive, is, let's say, for example, you wanted to go work at Boeing, which is a great employer, and a lot of folks from U of I have gone to work there in various different capacities. Well, they have a college recruiting team, and I'm sure you've been in touch with them, but they also have folks that are professional engineers that support the recruiting team, and they sort of get involved in different ways. And they've got professional engineers that are involved in campus level activities more and less actively. And so you can go directly to the recruiting team, but you can also go directly to those professional engineers and ask them about their careers, ask them about different parts of the company, and basically just navigate that organization more effectively because you've got other touch points into the organization. That's the power of having a referral or having a direct line of communication into a company. And so you can use LinkedIn to help you navigate the company, navigate the alumni network, to find those right points of contact. It requires work and it requires being tactful and reaching out to people directly, but it can be a really powerful way to give yourself a leg up in the recruitment process. And I just quickly will point out that there are kind of two ways to connect with people. One, you can offer to connect with someone, just sort of like the equivalent of like a friend request, but basically a more permanent connection between the two profiles. And, typically folks will send a message that's something to the effect of, really enjoyed meeting you, want to stay in touch, can I add you to my network? This is just one example. But I'll also point out that you can reach out to folks on an outbound basis that may not be a connection of yours. So, for example, many of you, I don't know anyone personally in the audience really, but at the same time, we're in the alumni network together, right? I'm in the U of I alumni network, and you are a student. So you could reach out to say, hey, I found your profile on LinkedIn. I noticed you went to U of I. You can send me a message directly. You don't necessarily have to connect with me. And if I'm, it's a way to get in contact with folks, to basically disintermediate contact with folks. And so it's a really powerful tool to go direct to the alumni network and basically introduce yourself and start a conversation. And so you have two options. You can connect with them and send them a message, or you can just send a message directly. You don't have to be connected necessarily. And these are just two examples of sort of concise, poignant messages to get the point across that you'd like to have a brief conversation, and don't overdo it. Get to the point, and these types of short, poignant messages tend to be pretty effective. So let's assume you've figured out what type of career you want. You want to be an engineer in XYZ field, these types of companies, or in this broad field. Well, then you can also use LinkedIn to figure out more, to learn more about a particular company. Some companies actually pay LinkedIn to have like a premium version of the company page to provide more information about what it's like to be an employee there. Other companies don't necessarily pay for this, but there's still some pretty helpful content about companies available on LinkedIn. So it's a great tool to learn about a company, learn about where they're located, what they do, the types of products that they offer. You can also learn a lot about particular people who work there. So let's say, for example, you want to work at a particular company, no one from U of I happens to work there. You can go through you can still find people who work at that company and find connections that way. And again, still reach out directly. And also, a lot of companies are increasingly putting job openings on LinkedIn because they're finding that it can be a pretty easy way to get the word out about a particular job opening and get a lot of applicants easily. So you can explore jobs at a particular company and job descriptions. You can find the hiring manager. It's sort of a one-stop shop to find companies, learn about the companies themselves, find jobs, learn about those specific jobs, and then get the introductions to those folks. The last thing I'll say on this is, second to last thing I'll say, you can automate a lot of this. So now once you've decided there are certain types of companies that you're interested in, you can create automated searches and alerts to help you figure out or to help notify you when a company you're interested in has posted a new job that might be relevant for you. And you can, as opposed to having to check back on a regular basis, you can automate away a lot of the ongoing maintenance for a job. And actually, one thing I've seen folks do is even if you have a job, you can have an alert set up just so you sort of are aware of what else is going on in the labor markets, who's hiring for what types of roles. It's just a good way to keep your ear to the ground for how the job market's moving in areas that it might be relevant or interesting to you. And then the last thing I'll say is LinkedIn has built a business, a pretty massive business, selling licenses to recruiters of all shapes and sizes, from large companies to small companies to staffing agencies. And so a significant portion of recruiters use LinkedIn in some capacity to find candidates. And so the return on investment in terms of building your profile and spending some time there to recruit through the platform is a good use of time, just given the number of jobs, the number of companies, and the number of recruiters, professional recruiters that are on the platform actively seeking candidates. Okay, so that's all I have in terms of content, and I just wanted to finally say a few points, and some of this is a bit of a summary or sort of a final readout, but I think these are important points to end on, which are, first and foremost, accuracy is important. You have to be sure to accurately represent yourself. You certainly don't want to mislead people on your professional experiences, your educational background. You can be thoughtful about how you portray those points, but they should be factually accurate experiences. And it shouldn't grossly mislead people. And then also, from an accuracy perspective, also check for typos, grammatical errors. You'd be surprised the number of times people make very common mistakes. Secondly, is this point around authenticity. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but share information on this platform and engage on it in a way that's authentic to you and your style. I've shared some examples about how I've used the platform, and if you go to my profile, you'll notice that I have professional experiences, but I tend to have very high-level details about each of those experiences. I haven't gone into a ton of detail. I'm sure you'll find examples that are where folks have gone into more detail, and that can be okay. It just depends on that person's style. There are other folks that also post a lot of content to LinkedIn. They reach out to a lot of people on an outbound basis. And that's not necessarily bad. I'll give you one example. A classmate of mine from Wharton, she has basically built a career building a LinkedIn following on the work that she's done as an investor in AI technology. She kind of amazingly just has started by just posting a lot of content, engaging with people on LinkedIn. I feel like she spends hours and hours a day on LinkedIn talking to folks, but she went from, graduating kind of around the same time as me. She had, a few thousand connections, and that was her original follower base, but then it grew and grew and grew. And so now she's got 130, 140,000 followers on LinkedIn, and she ended up getting a job as a venture capitalist based on this network. And so I share that example as sort of like an extreme other example of that's a totally different style of engagement on the platform, but equally valid for her particular career objectives, and it's equally authentic. That's how she wants to engage, and that's totally fine. It's not my style, and I also think that's okay. It's worth saying privacy is important. Double check the privacy settings of your profile. LinkedIn's done a better job over time to try to be transparent about what you are and are not sharing and have more control over that data, but it's worth doing a very thorough double check on what your privacy settings are. And in general, you should be discerning about what information you put on your profile in the first place. You should almost assume that all of the data that you share on LinkedIn might become public at some point. And if you have that lens, then on top of that, layer in your privacy settings in the hope that they work. But it's important to just have a second thought on privacy and how comfortable you are with the information you're sharing. It's worth saying this is a professional network, a professional social network, and therefore it's important to act professionally on the network. You're associating yourself with the university, with professional connections, with your employer, with potential nonprofit or volunteer organizations that you're associated with, and so the content engagement should reflect your professionalism. And I'll say, for example, there are tons of examples of folks that use the platform inappropriately, and it's unacceptable. This friend of mine from business school I mentioned, the number of inbound requests she gets that are just inappropriate, that happen to be from men. It's unbelievable, and it's entirely inappropriate, and it's not what she likes to say is LinkedIn's not a dating site. And therefore, the content should reflect that. So it's worth mentioning. And the last point I'll say about LinkedIn, and kind of what I really like about the platform, is there's a significant amount of democratization associated with it, because you have very, very senior individuals, also people mid-level careers, as well as entry-level folks, sort of all engaging on this platform. And more or less, you can reach out to some pretty senior people and get in touch with them if you have a reason to be in touch. I think there's some pretty powerful examples of people reaching out to Mark Cuban, the sort of famous investor, or Jeff Weiner is pretty notorious for his engagement on the platform. People would post comments of, "Hey, XYZ feature on LinkedIn isn't doing well," and they tag Jeff, and Jeff would reply in the comments and say, "Thanks, that's really great advice," and he'd CC the product manager responsible for that particular part of the platform. So, and I reach out to CEOs as a function of my job. I have to reach out to senior leaders at particular companies that we're interested in, and I just reach out directly to CEOs all the time, and it's a really democratizing platform, because you can just go directly to the source. So as it relates to you folks, don't be afraid to reach out to senior leaders, to people that are interesting to you directly, because you have that opportunity through this platform. All I would say is do so in a professional and respectful manner, an authentic manner, and it can be a useful tool for you. So that's it for me. I will pause here on this slide. This is my personal email address. If you're more than welcome to send me an email if you'd like to follow up with me directly afterwards. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And I'll stop here and open up the floor for any questions that folks might have on anything I've covered, anything I haven't covered that you think I might be able to opine on. I'm happy to share.
I'll start the ball rolling, Gary. Bob Rampa here in Seattle. 36 years with Boeing. I never used LinkedIn to post my own resume, obviously. I was from the paper age. But having looked at plenty of LinkedIn information, I might add a few things. One, keep it up to date. Out-of-date information is useless. And two, be careful how much, this goes to your point about privacy. Be careful what you post on there. Don't post especially when you get into the professional world, don't post any information that the company doesn't want to get out. We at Boeing, we were able to figure out what Airbus was doing based on LinkedIn information. We would just go find Airbus engineers. They would post incredibly detailed resumes on LinkedIn, telling us exactly what they were working on and when they worked on it. And it was easy to connect the dots and do a little, I don't want to use the word espionage, but they put it out there. So
Yeah.
I admonish people to be careful what they post.
I think that's totally right. And that kind of gets to the point I tried to make earlier on as well, which is you don't really know the audience for this data. So I tend to keep descriptions at a really high level. And I've seen folks post their resume, and resumes tend to be pretty detailed. And oftentimes, I've tried to be very careful because I work in an industry where intellectual property concerns are top of mind. And I assure, Bob, even more so, given the national security components to what you do, not to mention the intellectual property components. But even in resumes, people tend to, as they're talking about their job, they're talking about their experiences. And so they tend to share information that probably technically is confidential or protected under NDA. But, when you're just in a physical interview room, there's relatively little damage you can do when you're passing across a resume, and this is pre-COVID, obviously, but when you're passing a resume across the desk and saying, here's my experience, and maybe, something you have on the resume is, in the gray area in terms of acceptable information to share. But when you do that on LinkedIn, as Bob has given a great example of, you have Airbus engineers sitting in Toulouse posting their resumes talking about the detailed products that they're working on. Well, all of a sudden, I don't forget how many employees there are at Boeing, but call it 100,000 Boeing employees all basically have access to that data to try to figure out what they're working on, and that's really important competitive information that they shouldn't have been sharing. So it's really important to think through privacy and data, and you should basically just assume the worst. You should assume that everything you put on there is going to be available to anyone. And then that should be the lens through which you put information online. So Bob, thanks very much for that example. I appreciate it. Okay. I appreciate a lot of this is pretty straightforward. Are there anyone else in the audience have any questions? I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, happy to give folks the time back. Okay. Well, Courtney, thanks so much for the invitation, and Sam as well for reaching out. It's great to be reconnected with the program, and this is my email address. So if folks would like to get in touch with me directly, please don't hesitate. I'd happily have the conversation. But otherwise, I'll wish you all the best with the rest of the semester and the rest of these webinars.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much for your time today and for your presentation. I found it informative, and I think I will be going out to my LinkedIn profile and updating a few things because I'm sure it's a little date right now. So I do want to mention that next week our session will be on unknown trajectories. We will have 3 alumni, one of whom is online with us right now. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely see you again next week. Unknown trajectories is just our way of saying Aero related careers, I guess, or Aero adjacent, as Laura Gerhold likes to call them. So we'll be talking with 3 recent alumni and how they're using the skills that they learned here at aerospace engineering to move into a field that's not aerospace engineering. Gary, we could have had you on next week as well, I think.
Yeah, well, maybe next year I can switch sessions.
There we go. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you have any questions about this series, feel free to email me. Gary's given you his email so you can follow up with him if you would like to. And Deborah has put this in the chat, but I just want to put this out there that aerospace engineering does have a LinkedIn group. So feel free to find us out on LinkedIn and join. And if you can't find that, just look for my profile and it's in one of my groups. So, all righty. Thank you, everyone. That is our program for today.
Bye.